They say hospitals are places of healing, sterile environments where science conquers suffering and the sick return to health. But what happens when healing fails? When the hospitals themselves become monuments to pain, abandoned and forgotten, their empty halls echoing with memories of patients who never left? Across Massachusetts, 12 such places stand in various states of decay, each carrying stories that locals whisper about, but rarely approach after dark. These aren't just empty buildings. They're repositories of suffering on a scale most modern minds struggle to comprehend. Places where experimental treatments crossed ethical lines, where patients were forgotten by families and society, where death was so common it became routine. And according to those who've dared to explore them, these hospitals remember. Today we're bringing to life 12 abandoned medical facilities in Massachusetts where the boundary between history and horror blurs, and where the past, they say, still screams. The Danvers State Hospital rises on Hathorne Hill like a Gothic nightmare carved in red brick. Its elaborate Victorian architecture designed to inspire hope, but now inspiring only dread. Built in 1878 following the Kirkbride Plan, a revolutionary approach to mental health care that emphasized light, air, and humane treatment. Danvers quickly descended from enlightened facility to house of horrors as overcrowding and budget cuts transformed good intentions into systematic neglect. At its peak in the 1940s, Danvers housed over 2,300 patients in a facility designed for 600. Patients slept in hallways, in bathrooms, in any available space while staff struggled to provide even basic care. It was here that Dr. Walter Freeman performed some of his infamous lobotomies, the transorbital procedure where an ice pick-like instrument was hammered through the eye socket into the frontal lobe, supposedly curing mental illness but often leaving patients in vegetative states. The hospital's records, partially preserved in state archives, document over 40 lobotomies performed between 1949 and 1954, though some researchers believe the actual number was far higher, with many procedures going undocumented. The hospital closed in 1992 after decades of decline, its buildings left to decay while the state debated what to do with the sprawling 77-acre complex. For 13 years, Danvers stood empty, its broken windows staring blindly over the town below. Urban explorers who ventured inside described scenes from nightmares: patient records scattered across floors, restraint chairs rusting in abandoned rooms, hydrotherapy tubs where aggressive patients were submerged for hours at a time, and in the basement tunnels connecting the buildings, graffiti left by visitors that read less like vandalism and more like warnings. They're still here. Don't go to the 4th floor. It followed me home. But it wasn't just graffiti that unnerved explorers. Multiple independent witnesses described identical experiences while inside Danvers. The sound of screaming coming from empty wards, footsteps in the floors above when you were on the top level, doors slamming in windless corridors, and most disturbingly, the sensation of being touched, gentle pressure on shoulders or arms as if someone was trying to get your attention. In 2006, the main building was partially demolished, despite fierce opposition from preservationists. The iconic administration building and 2 wings were renovated into luxury apartments, an ironic fate for a place of such suffering. But construction workers reported strange occurrences during renovation, tools vanishing and reappearing in different locations, unexplained cold spots in specific rooms that climate control couldn't eliminate, and on multiple occasions, electrical systems failing in patterns that didn't correspond to any wiring fault. One construction foreman refused to work night shifts after what he described as someone whispering my name over and over in Ward D, where the violent patients used to be housed. Today, residents of the Danvers apartments report strange phenomena with disturbing regularity. Voices in the hallways late at night, shadows moving past windows in units they know are empty, and persistent feeling in certain apartments that they're not alone. that something is watching from corners or standing just behind them. The apartment management doesn't officially acknowledge these reports, but unofficially, certain units have higher turnover rates than others, always the ones located in what were once the most troubled wards of the original hospital. Just 30 miles west, the Taunton State Hospital still stands partially operational, making it unique among Massachusetts' abandoned medical facilities. Opened in 1854 as one of the first public mental health facilities in America, Taunton has expanded and contracted over its 170-year history, swallowing adjacent land and buildings, while portions of its vast complex fell into disuse and decay. What makes Taunton particularly disturbing is that active treatment wards exist alongside abandoned buildings, separated only by fences and locks that don't always hold against determined explorers, or, locals say, against things that were never meant to leave. The Kirkbride building, Taunton's original structure, was abandoned in the 1970s and left to rot while newer facilities were built around it. The building is enormous, stretching over 1,000 feet in its signature batwing layout, with dozens of patient wards branching off from central corridors. It's been locked and sealed multiple times, but within weeks, new entry points appear, broken windows, forced doors, as if something wants access maintained. Security guards patrolling the active portions of Taunton report hearing sounds from the Kirkbride building that shouldn't be possible. Music, specifically old-fashioned big band music from the 1940s and 50s, playing faintly from upper floors. Laughter echoing through the halls during the deep hours of night. And, most disturbing, crying. One guard described working a midnight shift and hearing a woman sobbing in the Kirkbride building. The sound clear enough that he called for backup, convinced someone was trapped inside. When maintenance entered to investigate, they found no one, but they did find a patient room on the 3rd floor, one of hundreds of identical rooms, with its door inexplicably wide open despite being locked during the last inspection. And on the floor, a single fresh footprint in the dust, bare, human-shaped, but wrong somehow. The guard who reported it requested a transfer to a different facility the next day and refused to discuss what aspect of the footprint disturbed him beyond saying the toes were too long, and there were too many of them. Taunton Cemetery, located on the hospital grounds and containing over 3,000 unmarked graves, adds another layer to the facility's dark reputation. Patients who died with no family to claim them were buried in simple plots marked only by numbers, their identities recorded in ledgers that were often lost, damaged, or deliberately destroyed to protect the privacy of families ashamed of their institutionalized relatives. Today, the cemetery is overgrown, the grave markers worn smooth by time and weather. Local legend says that on foggy nights, you can see figures wandering among the headstones, patients still searching for the names they lost in life. But the hospital doesn't allow public access to the cemetery, citing safety concerns and respect for the dead. Yet photographs taken with telephoto lenses from the fence line occasionally show anomalies, blurred shapes among the graves that weren't visible to the naked eye, shadows that fall in directions inconsistent with the light source. One paranormal investigation team that obtained rare permission to investigate the Kirkbride building in 2013 recorded audio that has never been fully explained. At 2:47 a.m., their recorder in a 4th-floor hallway captured a voice, male, elderly sounding, speaking clearly. The words, transcribed from the audio, were, "We're not sick anymore. Why won't they let us leave?" The recorder was placed in an empty hallway, no investigator near it, and the voice was followed by the distinct sound of a door being rattled, someone trying to force it open from the inside. When the team reviewed their other recorders, none captured the voice, only the one placed in that specific hallway, suggesting the sound wasn't carried through the building but originated right next to the device. The investigation team published their findings in a paranormal journal, but they never returned to Taunton. Their report concluded with an unusual statement. Whatever remains in the Kirkbride building is aware, intelligent, and deeply unhappy. Further investigation would require specialists in psychology, as much as paranormal research, because what we encountered felt less like ghosts and more like patients who don't understand that their hospital isn't treating them anymore. Moving north to Westboro, the remains of the Westboro State Hospital present a different kind of horror. Decay on a massive scale. Closed in 2010 after 130 years of operation, Westboro was one of Massachusetts's largest mental health facilities, housing over 1,500 patients at its peak. Unlike Danvers, which was partially preserved, Westboro was simply abandoned, left to the elements and vandals who have systematically destroyed much of the interior. But even in ruins, the hospital exerts a presence that drives away all but the most determined explorers. The administration building, a massive 3-story structure with a distinctive clock tower, still stands relatively intact, but locals avoid it after dark. The building's facade, elaborate Victorian brickwork with arched windows and decorative stonework, gives it an almost cathedral-like appearance. But step inside and you enter hell. The floors are rotted through in many places, revealing basement levels filled with stagnant water and the remains of old medical equipment. The walls are covered in graffiti, layer upon layer of spray paint that doesn't hide the peeling paint beneath. Institutional green and gray colors that seem to absorb light rather than reflect it. And everywhere, scattered like fallen leaves, are patient records. Thousands of pages detailing treatments, diagnoses, and lives reduced to clinical observations. Most explorers who document Westboro note the records with a kind of horror. Names, birth dates, admission dates, and then the treatments. Electroshock therapy, often administered multiple times per week. Hydrotherapy, patients restrained in ice baths for hours. Insulin shock therapy, where patients were deliberately sent into diabetic comas. Chemical restraints, heavy sedation that left patients in zombie-like states. And interspersed throughout, notes on patient behavior that reveal how little was understood about mental health. One record, photographed by an urban explorer and posted online before being removed under pressure from the state, described a 22-year-old woman admitted in 1957 for hysteria after she refused an arranged marriage. Her treatment included electroshock therapy 3 times per week for 6 months until, the final entry noted, patient now docile and compliant. Recommend discharge to family. No follow-up on whether she recovered or simply had her will broken. Records like these fill the abandoned buildings of Westboro, blowing through broken windows, scattered by rain and wind, testimonies to suffering on an industrial scale. But the records aren't what frighten locals. It's what happens when you try to read them. Multiple urban explorers have described the same experience. You pick up a patient file, start reading, and slowly become aware of a presence. Someone standing just behind you, reading over your shoulder. If you turn around, nothing is there. But the sensation persists, growing stronger until you feel breath on the back of your neck, warm and humid, carrying the faint smell of disinfectant and something else. Something organic and wrong. Most people drop the files and leave at that point. One explorer, posting anonymously on an urban exploration forum, described ignoring the sensation, continuing to read despite the overwhelming urge to flee. I got through 2 more pages of the file, documenting a man who'd been institutionalized for 34 years for what we'd now call depression, before the breathing behind me changed. It got faster, almost panicked, and I heard a sound like someone choking. I spun around, camera raised, and saw nothing. But the file I'd been holding was gone, just vanished from my hands. I searched the room. It wasn't there. It was like someone had taken it while I was reading, snatched it away. I didn't go back to Westboro. Whatever is there, it doesn't want its story read. The Medfield State Hospital, located in Medfield approximately 20 miles southwest of Boston, offers a different kind of haunting, one that's almost beautiful in its melancholy. Closed in 2003, Medfield's campus consists of dozens of buildings spread across 1.5 square miles, all in various states of decay but still architecturally stunning. The town of Medfield, rather than demolishing the complex, has preserved it as a kind of accidental historical park, allowing controlled urban exploration and even permitting film crews to use it as a location. Several movies and TV shows have been shot at Medfield, including scenes from Shutter Island, the psychological thriller about a mental hospital hiding dark secrets. But even with its semi-official status, Medfield carries an atmosphere of profound sadness that affects even skeptics. The buildings, while empty, still contain remnants of patient life. Furniture too heavy to remove, filing cabinets with drawers hanging open, wheelchairs rusting in corners. The chapel, one of Medfield's most iconic buildings with its distinctive brick facade and arched windows, still has hymnals in the pews, open to specific pages as if parishioners had simply paused mid-service and never returned. Visitors to Medfield describe an overwhelming sense of melancholy, a feeling that intensifies in certain buildings. The administration building, where patient records were kept, and where families came to commit their relatives, has a waiting room that still contains original furniture. People who sit in that waiting room, even on sunny days, report feeling immensely sad, sometimes to the point of tears, for no reason they can articulate. One visitor described it as absorbing the grief of every family that ever sat there, saying goodbye to someone they loved but couldn't care for. The sensation fades once you leave the building, but while you're inside, it's overwhelming. Photographers who've documented Medfield note another strange phenomenon. Cameras malfunction in specific locations, always the same ones. The fourth floor of the North Building, where violent patients were housed in maximum security, is particularly notorious for causing digital cameras to display static-filled images or refuse to take pictures altogether. Film cameras work but often produce images with unexplained artifacts, blurred shapes that weren't visible during shooting, light anomalies that don't correspond to any source. In 2015, a professional photography team attempted to document the entire Medfield campus for a historical archive project. They completed photographs of every building except one, the Howe building, which housed the most severe cases of mental illness. Every time they entered Howe, their equipment failed. Batteries drained instantly, even fresh ones. Digital displays showed error messages. One camera, a professional-grade DSLR worth over $4,000, simply died, its electronics fried despite having no contact with water or extreme heat. The team gave up after 3 attempts, and the Howe building remains largely undocumented photographically, standing silent at the edge of the campus. The Worcester State Hospital, now completely demolished except for a few outbuildings, was once Massachusetts's largest mental health facility, housing over 3,000 patients in a sprawling complex that covered several city blocks in Worcester. Built in 1833, Worcester pioneered the concept of moral treatment, the idea that mental illness could be treated through kindness, structure, and occupational therapy rather than chains and restraint. For a time, it worked. Worcester had one of the highest recovery rates in the nation. But as funding decreased and patient populations increased, moral treatment gave way to warehousing, and Worcester descended into conditions that would eventually lead to its closure in 1991. Before demolition in 2008, urban explorers documented Worcester's decay in thousands of photographs. The building had been severely damaged by multiple fires, its interior a maze of charred rooms and collapsed floors. But even in ruins, evidence of its history remained. Patient artwork on walls, murals painted by occupational therapy classes that had somehow survived the fires, medical equipment, examination tables, restraint chairs, surgical instruments left behind when the hospital closed, and in the basement, the morgue. Worcester's morgue was operational until the hospital's final days, processing bodies of patients who died in care, a shockingly common occurrence even in the facility's later years. The morgue itself, a concrete chamber with drainage channels cut into the floor and original autopsy tables still in place, became a focal point for paranormal investigators in the years between Worcester's closure and demolition. Multiple teams reported identical phenomena. Voices, male and female, speaking in low tones from the morgue's corners where shadows gathered too thickly. Temperature drops of 15-20 degrees that occurred in seconds with no apparent cause. And most disturbingly, the sound of something being dragged across the concrete floor, a heavy wet sound that echoed through the chamber. One investigation team caught this sound on audio. An analysis revealed it matched the acoustic profile of a body being moved across concrete, but the recording was made at 3 a.m. in a locked morgue with all investigators accounted for in a different area of the building. The team's lead investigator described feeling physically sick while in the morgue, a nausea that faded when he left but returned instantly upon re-entering. It felt like the room was full of grief, he said in a later interview. Not ghosts exactly, but the accumulated sadness of every person who died there, every family that never got to say goodbye. The air was thick with it, to the point where breathing felt difficult. Worcester was demolished to make way for new development, but workers on the demolition crew reported strange occurrences throughout the process. Equipment malfunctions at crucial moments. Sections of building that resisted demolition requiring multiple attempts to bring down, and on several occasions, workers refusing to enter certain areas, claiming they heard screaming from inside despite the buildings being verified as empty. One worker told a local news reporter, off the record, whatever was in there, it didn't want to leave. Every day felt like we were fighting to tear it down. I've worked demolition for 20 years, and I've never felt a building fight back before. Today, the Worcester site is home to modern buildings, apartments, and retail spaces. But local real estate agents quietly admit that certain units are harder to rent or sell than others, particularly those built directly over where the main hospital building stood. Residents report sounds in the night, voices, footsteps, and a pervading sense of sadness that no amount of renovation can eliminate. The Foxborough State Hospital, less well-known than Danvers or Worcester, but no less tragic, operated from 1890 to 1976 as a facility specifically for tuberculosis patients. Tuberculosis, the White Plague, killed millions worldwide in the 19th and early 20th centuries, and sanatoriums like Foxborough were built to isolate the contagious patients from the general population. The theory was that fresh air, sunlight, and rest would cure the disease, but in reality, most patients sent to Foxborough never left. They died in its wards, were buried in its cemetery, and were forgotten by families who feared infection. Foxborough's main building, a sprawling 3-story structure with distinctive sleeping porches, where patients were wheeled out to breathe fresh air regardless of weather, stands abandoned and deteriorating. The sleeping porches, long open-air balconies on each floor, still have the tracks where patient beds were rolled out, metal rails rusted but intact. Urban explorers describe the porches as the most unsettling part of Foxborough because they're exposed to the elements, snow, rain, wind, yet they feel enclosed, as if invisible walls contain the space. Standing on a sleeping porch, particularly at night, creates an overwhelming sense of claustrophobia despite being completely open to the sky. Visitors report feeling as if they're trapped, unable to breathe properly, a psychological echo of the tuberculosis patients who spent months on those same porches, struggling for every breath. The wards themselves are nightmarish. Patient rooms, 20 or more per floor, are tiny, barely large enough for a bed and small table. Many still have original fixtures, sinks, overhead lights, their 1950s institutional design unchanged. Graffiti covers the walls, but beneath the spray paint, you can still see painted names and dates scratched into plaster by patients marking their time. One room on the second floor has a calendar scratched into the wall, spanning from January 1954 to June 1955, each day marked with a small line. 18 months of someone counting days, waiting to get well, or waiting to die. The calendar stops abruptly on June 17, 1955, with no notation of why. Below it, in shaky handwriting barely visible, are the words, "I can't breathe." Foxborough's cemetery, like Taunton's, contains hundreds of unmarked graves. Tuberculosis was so stigmatized that many families refused to claim bodies, preferring to let their relatives be buried anonymously rather than acknowledge the disease. The cemetery is overgrown, accessible only by an overgrown path through woods that have reclaimed the land. Local teenagers occasionally dare each other to visit the cemetery at night, though most turn back before reaching it, claiming they hear coughing in the woods, deep, wet coughing that follows them until they leave the property. One group that made it to the cemetery after dark described seeing lights among the graves, faint and bluish, moving slowly between the markers. They assumed they were other explorers called out, received no response. The lights continued moving, seemingly unaware of the teenagers watching. Then, according to their account, the lights began moving toward them, accelerating, and the group fled, hearing what sounded like multiple people running behind them through the undergrowth. They reached their car, drove away, and never returned. When asked if they'd seen the faces of whoever was chasing them, they said they hadn't looked back. Too terrified by the sound of labored breathing, dozens of people all trying to breathe through damaged lungs, a sound that shouldn't exist in an empty forest at midnight. The Northampton State Hospital, closed in 1993, was unique among Massachusetts mental health facilities for its progressive approach and relatively humane treatment of patients. Built in 1858, Northampton emphasized occupational therapy, education, and patient autonomy to a degree uncommon in its era. Patients worked in gardens, produced crafts sold to fund hospital operations, and were encouraged to maintain their skills and interests. For many years, Northampton had success rates that embarrassed larger facilities like Worcester. But even humane treatment couldn't prevent overcrowding, and by the mid-20th century, Northampton had descended into the same warehousing conditions that plagued state institutions across America. The hospital closed, its buildings abandoned, and for 20 years, Northampton stood empty, slowly deteriorating. In 2006, a fire of suspicious origin destroyed several buildings, and in 2013, the remaining structures were demolished despite protests from preservation groups. Before demolition, paranormal investigators conducted extensive studies of Northampton, attracted by reports from security guards of sounds that shouldn't exist in an empty hospital. Specifically, music. One guard, working the graveyard shift in 2009, reported hearing what sounded like a concert coming from the main auditorium, a large space where patients once gathered for films, performances, and social events. He walked to the auditorium, expecting to find homeless squatters or vandals with a radio, but as he approached, the music grew clearer. It was live. He could hear the slight variations, the human imperfections that recordings don't have. He described it as big band music, something from the 1940s, upbeat and danceable. When he opened the auditorium doors, the music stopped instantly, and the room was empty, dark, and cold. His flashlight revealed nothing but an empty space. The stage bare, seats removed decades ago, the floor covered in debris. But in the center of the room, visible in the dust coating the floor, was a pattern of footprints, dozens of them, as if people had been dancing. The guard photographed them, and the images show clear shoe prints, men's and women's, arranged in the formations of swing dancing. The prints were fresh, disturbing the dust recently, yet the guard had heard no one enter or leave. He quit 2 weeks later, unwilling to work nights at Northampton anymore. Paranormal teams that investigated before demolition recorded numerous audio anomalies, voices, footsteps, and on one occasion, what sounded like applause coming from the empty auditorium. One team brought period music, recordings from the 1940s, and played them in the auditorium while recording. The playback revealed something impossible. A few seconds after their music ended, faint music continued for another 30 seconds. The same song but played differently, as if a live band was finishing the tune. The recording was analyzed by audio experts who confirmed it wasn't echo or playback artifact. It was a separate audio source, acoustic, not electronic, recorded by microphones sensitive enough to pick up whispers from across a room. When Northampton was demolished, workers reported an atmosphere of sadness pervading the site, and one bulldozer operator described feeling like he was destroying a home rather than a hospital. You could feel that people had been happy there, at least sometimes, he said. Not like some of these other places where it's all horror. Northampton felt sad because good things had happened there and then been forgotten. That's a different kind of haunting, one that sticks with you. The Monson State Hospital, possibly Massachusetts's most forgotten mental health facility, operated from 1898 to 1991 in the small town of Monson, treating patients with developmental disabilities. Monson was always small, never housing more than 200 patients, and its buildings were modest compared to the sprawling campuses of Danvers or Worcester. But what Monson lacked in size, it made up for in longevity. Over 90 years of continuous operation, 9 decades of patient stories, now lost to history. After closure, Monson's buildings were used sporadically for various purposes before being abandoned completely in the early 2000s. Today, the main hospital building, a 3-story brick structure, stands alone on its original campus, surrounded by overgrown fields and forest that have reclaimed what were once manicured grounds. The building is dangerous. Floors compromised, ceilings collapsed in many areas, and officially off-limits. But that hasn't stopped exploration. Monson attracts fewer urban explorers than the more famous hospitals, partly because of its remote location, and partly because of its reputation. Those who have explored Monson describe it as the most emotionally disturbing of all Massachusetts's abandoned hospitals. Not because of dramatic hauntings, but because of the profound sense of isolation that pervades every room. The patient wards, long hallways lined with small rooms, still contain remnants of the people who lived there. Drawings taped to walls, now faded and peeling, names written in marker on door frames, personal effects left behind when the hospital closed. Unlike other facilities where belongings were cleared out, Monson's contents were largely left in place, creating a time capsule of 1991. Clothes still hang in closets. Shoes sit paired on floors. Photo albums lie on dusty shelves. One explorer described finding a teddy bear in a patient room, sitting on a bed, its fur matted but still recognizable. On impulse she picked it up and immediately felt overwhelming sadness. Not fear, just an aching loneliness that brought her to tears. She put the bear down, left the room, and the feeling faded. But she never forgot it. It wasn't a ghost, she said later. It was memory. That bear remembered being held by someone who lived their entire life in that room, who loved it because they had nothing else. Objects can hold that kind of emotion, and in a place like Monson, where people spent decades in tiny rooms with only a few possessions, everything is saturated with it. Paranormal investigators who've studied Monson report minimal traditional haunting activity, no apparitions, few unexplained sounds, but they unanimously describe the emotional weight of the location as overwhelming. One investigator, a skeptic who approached the site expecting to debunk local legends, spent 3 hours inside before leaving abruptly. He described feeling like he was intruding on something private and sacred, that being in Monson felt like trespassing in someone's home while they watched from the shadows. I kept wanting to apologize, he said. To say I'm sorry for walking through their lives, for seeing their things, for treating their home like an attraction. I've investigated dozens of locations and never felt that before. Monson wasn't scary. It was heartbreaking. The facility's isolation, both geographical and historical, has left it largely undocumented. No major news coverage, no film shoots. Just a slowly collapsing building holding the memories of hundreds of people whose lives were spent in rooms most of us couldn't imagine living in for a single night. Local historians have attempted to research Monson's past, but records are incomplete, many destroyed in a fire at a state archive facility in 1995. What remains suggests that Monson's patients were among society's most vulnerable, people with developmental disabilities who, in the early to mid-20th century, were hidden away by families ashamed or overwhelmed. Many spent their entire lives at Monson, arriving as children and dying as elderly adults, their existence reduced to a file number and a plot in an unmarked grave. The Grafton State Hospital, closed in 1971, has been largely demolished, but one building remains, the administration building, preserved as part of a modern development. The building, renovated into office space, maintains much of its original architecture, including the distinctive central rotunda with its domed ceiling and marble floors. But tenants of the building report strange occurrences that suggest renovation didn't erase the past. Specifically, footsteps in the rotunda after hours, always the same pattern, someone walking a circuit around the perimeter as if patrolling or pacing. Security cameras have recorded nothing but multiple witnesses, security guards, cleaning staff, late working office employees, have heard the footsteps, heavy, deliberate, echoing on marble. One security guard, working alone on New Year's Eve, heard the footsteps start at exactly midnight and continue for 10 minutes before stopping abruptly. He described feeling watched the entire time, as if whoever was walking was checking on him, making sure he was doing his job. The building's basement, which houses mechanical systems and storage, is avoided by maintenance staff who report feelings of intense anxiety when working alone down there. One worker described hearing whispers coming from old ductwork, too faint to make out words, but clearly human voices, many of them, all talking at once. The whispers stop when you approach the vents and start again when you move away. Building management attributes these reports to acoustic anomalies, sounds from the street or adjacent buildings carried through ventilation systems, but employees remain convinced something else is happening. One former tenant, a law firm that occupied the second floor for 3 years, moved to a different building after multiple staff members refused to work late. Citing an oppressive atmosphere that intensified after 6 p.m., the Gardner State Hospital, closed in 1976, has been completely demolished, replaced by a prison that now occupies the site. But the demolition and new construction hasn't eliminated reports of paranormal activity. Guards at the prison, which opened in 1985, report seeing figures in areas where no one should be, specifically near the perimeter fence line that corresponds to where Gardner's patient cemetery was located. The graves were supposedly relocated when the prison was built, but local legend says not all were found. Prison staff, speaking anonymously, describe feeling uneasy in certain areas, a sense that the ground beneath the facility is unhappy with its new purpose. One guard described it as replacing a place of illness with a place of punishment, and neither brings peace to land that's seen too much suffering. The prison administration doesn't officially acknowledge paranormal reports, but several guards have requested transfers or reassignments to different areas of the facility after experiencing unexplained phenomena. The Belchertown State School, not technically a hospital, but a facility for people with developmental disabilities, operated from 1922 to 1992, and has become one of Massachusetts's most notorious abandoned institutions. Its buildings, spread across 400 acres, remain standing in various states of decay, some renovated into modern housing, others left to crumble. Belchertown's history is particularly dark, even by the standards of state institutions. Investigations in the 1960s and 70s revealed horrific conditions, neglect, abuse, overcrowding that led to a federal class action lawsuit, and ultimately to the facility's closure. The stories that emerged from Belchertown, patients tied to beds for days, left in their own waste, denied basic medical care, shocked the public and accelerated the deinstitutionalization movement in Massachusetts. But closing Belchertown didn't erase its legacy. The buildings stand as monuments to systematic abuse, and those who've explored them describe an atmosphere of tangible anger. Unlike the sadness of Medfield or the isolation of Monson, Belchertown feels hostile. Multiple explorers have reported being followed through buildings by unseen presences, hearing footsteps that pace theirs exactly, staying just out of sight around corners or in adjoining rooms. Some have reported being touched, shoved, or scratched, physical contact that leaves marks. One explorer documented 3 parallel scratches on his arm that appeared while he was in the K building, notorious for housing the most severely disabled patients in the worst conditions. He felt no pain when they appeared, just suddenly noticed blood seeping through his shirt sleeve. The scratches were deep enough to scar. Paranormal investigation teams have conducted numerous studies of Belchertown, with results that range from inconclusive to deeply disturbing. Audio recordings capture voices, often saying single words or fragments of phrases. Help. Why? Hurts. Video cameras show shadow figures moving through hallways, appearing in doorways, visible for seconds before vanishing. And on thermal imaging, certain rooms show heat signatures, humanoid shapes that don't correspond to any living presence. One investigation team abandoned their study halfway through after their lead investigator was struck in the face by an invisible force hard enough to knock him down and bloody his nose. They left their equipment running as they retreated, and the audio captures what sounds like laughter, harsh and mocking, echoing through the empty building. Today, Belchertown is a controversial development. Some buildings have been renovated into housing, while others remain abandoned, fenced off, slowly collapsing. Residents of the renovated buildings report disturbing phenomena with alarming frequency. Doors locking from the inside, requiring maintenance to remove them from their hinges to free trapped residents. Water faucets turning on by themselves in the middle of the night. And most disturbingly, the sounds of children crying, echoing through hallways in buildings that now house only adults. Management has attempted to suppress these reports, fearing they'll damage property values. But local newspapers have documented enough incidents to establish a pattern. The final hospital on our tour is the Boston State Hospital, closed in 1979, which once stood in Mattapan. The facility has been completely demolished, replaced by modern development, but its legacy persists in local memory and occasional strange occurrences in buildings constructed on its former grounds. Boston State was Massachusetts's first mental hospital, founded in 1839 as the Boston Lunatic Hospital, making it one of the oldest psychiatric facilities in America. Over its 140-year history, tens of thousands of patients were treated, lived, and died within its walls. The burial ground, containing over 600 bodies, was paved over when the hospital expanded in the 1950s. The graves forgotten until construction projects in the 1990s began unearthing remains. Those bodies were eventually relocated, but how many were missed? In 2008, construction workers building new residences on part of the old Boston State campus struck a mass grave that wasn't on any map. Over 30 skeletons buried without coffins or markers, stacked in layers suggesting hasty disposal during an epidemic or period of extreme mortality. Work stopped while archaeologists excavated and documented the remains. DNA testing and forensic analysis revealed the bodies dated from the 1850s to early 1900s, but official records show no mass deaths during those periods at Boston State. The bodies were eventually reburied with appropriate ceremony, but their existence raised questions about how many other people died at Boston State without proper documentation or acknowledgement. Residents of buildings constructed on former Boston State land report phenomena that echo those at other redeveloped hospital sites. Voices, sounds of distress, feelings of being watched, an atmosphere of sadness that no amount of modern construction can eliminate. One apartment building manager described receiving multiple complaints about a specific unit. Always the same complaints: nightmares, difficulty sleeping, feeling unwelcome in their own home. The unit has been renovated multiple times, completely gutted and rebuilt, but the problems persist. Research into the building's location revealed it was constructed directly over what had been Boston State's isolation ward, where the most violent and disturbed patients were kept in solitary confinement. Whatever suffering occurred in that space seems to have seeped into the ground itself, resisting exorcism by demolition and redevelopment. 12 hospitals, 12 monuments to suffering and failed compassion. Each stands, or once stood, as a reminder of an era when mental illness, developmental disabilities, and disease were treated through isolation, experimentation, and too often, neglect. The buildings are gone or renovated, but the stories persist in local memory, in the reports of those brave or foolish enough to explore, and in the strange occurrences that suggest the past is never truly buried. Massachusetts's abandoned hospitals are brought to life not by restoration, but by the memories they hold and the phenomena they generate. They remind us that places can absorb trauma, that suffering on a massive scale leaves marks deeper than architecture, marks that time and demolition can't erase. These 12 hospitals, from Danvers's Gothic nightmare to Boston State's buried graves, form a network of dark history across Massachusetts, each site connected by shared purpose and shared tragedy. If you're fascinated by places where history refuses to stay buried, and where the past manifests in ways we can't fully explain, subscribe to explore more locations brought to life by the stories they hold. And if you ever find yourself near one of these abandoned hospitals, perhaps show respect, perhaps acknowledge the thousands who suffered there, and perhaps understand that some buildings remember everything that happened within their walls, and memory, as they say, is the most persistent ghost of all. 12 hospitals, 12 warnings carved in brick and stone across Massachusetts, reminding us that healing is harder than hurting, and that some wounds never close, they just wait in the dark for someone to remember them.